We are prosperous in life, and then life rewards us so that we give into life, and then life rewards us. And that's the cycle. That's also the cycle of the Kundalini, right? Kundalini rising, parasympathetic nerves coming back down, calming the body through the glands and the organs. Kundalini rising again. It's a current, it's an orbit, it's a circuit that once you get accustomed to igniting it, exciting it, inspiring it on a daily basis, just becomes a part of life. So whether you do it with Kriya Yoga, Hatha Yoga, any form, or Kundalini, it's that same living orbit. And then there's the heart cross and the lower cross, right? And so you have this, what I call, you have this gyroscope, right? A gyroscope has all these twirling wheels in all different directions so that you feel that balance in the center point.
Oh, Satnam, dear Sangat, wherever you are, whenever you're listening in from, I today have such a special guest on. He's one of the oldest Kundalini Yoga teachers around. I'd say we had Guru Ratana on, but this is the male equivalent to Guru Ratana. If you heard her podcast, I have the pleasure to introduce you today to Guru Singh. I think Guru Singh is now 80 already, if I'm not mistaken in my homework. But welcome, Guru Singh, to this podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you, Sandesh. You're right in the numbers, and 80 in my estimation is just a number. When people talk about elders, I wonder, who are they talking about? Who are they talking about, you know? And my mother, when she was 98 years old, we had a birthday party for her at the yoga center in Los Angeles, and someone came up to her, and she was very, very bright and very, very on point. And she had been a yogi for forever. My mom and dad were yogis when I was born. And somebody asked her, "So what's it like to be 98?" And she says, "It's just like 18, only you can't do quite as much." And so I will say that at 80, you can still do everything. But yeah.
You
So
definitely look
longevity
like
is a
that.
good thing.
You
Was that?
definitely look like that. You definitely look like that. You feel like that. I feel your energy. It's very vibrant. Very, yeah. It's very here. It's very present. It's.
Yeah, well, I've been that way my whole life. It's intimidating to some people, and I've had to work with that, because when you're always in your game, and you're always enthusiastic, and you're always wanting to connect, person to person, some people are, off put by that. Some people are, whoa, that's a little too much, and so those of us, and I'm sure that your listening and viewing audience feels the same, that they are that one who has been around and has often been told, "Oh, you tone it down a little, because not everybody is as enthusiastic about the experience of life as those of us who have been drawn into practices of higher awareness, such as Kundalini."
Yeah, and being raised since you were born into a space of yoga and yogic teachings, incredible. Were you ever aware that there were not people who were not receiving that kind of wisdom with their upbringing?
Yeah, pretty early on, I will say that what happened was that you know, a lot of people, if they had a tumultuous home, my home was a meditation center, and but children who have a tumultuous home, they tend to feel like the world outside is more calm and inviting than the world inside the home. My world was exactly the reverse of that. And so my calm center was in the household with my sister and my mother and my father and our animals and our meditative practices. So when I would go out into the world, that's when I would meet, you know, the chaos, if you will. And so I was in a very young time of my life, I was very aware that I had to navigate. And so I learned how to navigate social settings, you know, at like 4, 5, and 6, and 7 years old, which really helped me in teaching, because in teaching, you know, if you're in person or if you're online, you know, you're dealing with hundreds or thousands of different personas, and being able to blend into the way in which all of those personas are going to be able to relate to the information that you are attempting to convey. And so my early childhood, I was aware that I had to navigate the world, which was probably a very good thing. When I would be teased or bullied or whatever, you know, because every one of us has gone through things like that. I'm not unique in that regard. You know, and I would come home and complain to my mom or my dad, you know, and they would say, "Come on, let's go sit with this." And we would go and we would sit with whatever happened, right? Okay, they would say, "Okay, describe what happened," and I would describe it like a child, you know, oh, you know, and this and that, and they would say, "Okay, we got that now. Let's just imagine that, and let's just imagine that as a raging ocean, and we're in a boat and we're being tossed around, and then pretty soon the wind dies down and the storm starts to decrease and the water becomes calm, and now we're just sitting there on the water." And they would guide me through, and my sister as well. They would guide us through this process, you know, once a week, twice a week, whatever it took, right? So that was my early impression of the world around me.
Oh, why Guru? To have that kind of wisdom guiding you from a storming waters back to calm waters at such an early age, you must have done a lot of good in your previous lives to receive that kind of upraising, no?
Yeah, sometimes I think that the comment that I think best describes is that when we've done great things in past lives, sometimes we get what's called an in spite of life. And sometimes we get what is called a because of life. What my life was a because of. I became what I am because I was guided in that regard, in that way, by my ancestors. My great aunt, my mother's aunt and godmother, was serving the mission of Kriya Yoga of Sri Yukteswar. She got to India in 1916, and in 1919 she was studying with Sri Yukteswar from 1916, and in 1919 she was sent to Boston with Paramahansa Yogananda. And she worked with Paramahansa Yogananda throughout his life until 1952. So that was in the background of my upbringing, that incredible lineage. I have pictures of Paramahansa, Master Paramahansa, and my great aunt together. That was good, right? My great aunt together, and it just feels like home, right? That's because of upbringing. And then some people having a very advanced consciousness, they get it in spite of upbringing, which means that they are going to become what they are in spite of their family circumstance. That and I know a lot of these people, and what they're trained in is they're trained in knowing what not to do, because that's being displayed by either their parents or family members or their community. That they're given very harsh lessons at a very young age, and with those harsh lessons, they become this awareness of those things. And sometimes that's better than a because of, but they're both really good. And for example, in business study, they often say it is actually better to know what not to do than it is to know what to do. And so those in spite of births that are very, very high, very, very lofty, very aware, but born into a chaotic or even a traumatic family, they're learning what not to do on planet Earth so that they can guide themselves away from that example. I was raised by those who were showing me what to do. And so I applaud both circumstances. I think they're both very valuable.
Yeah, I think we cannot judge how karma works. It has a higher intelligence, and the best we can do is just ride the wave and grow our consciousness while riding that wave, right?
Mm-hmm. Big time, yes.
Well, you said you were just born after the Second World War, correct?
I was born actually during it. I was born in 1945, but just before, the end of the war. So I was in womb. I was in utero while the war was going on, and while the making of the atomic bomb and all of those things, right? And so, I had a good sensation of war while in the womb.
Hmm. And then your life also passed you through the Vietnam War. I think how were you?
I came of age, right? And by the way, Sandesh, I am so grateful to be talking with someone who I deeply respect, because I deeply respect the incredible strength of the Vietnamese people. Um, I'll, I'll give a couple of stories. Genghis Khan conquered the known world because the Mongolian people mastered the horse. They were the first culture that tamed the horse for the purpose of riding. Now, whether that's a good or a bad thing for the horse, I'm not here to debate, but I'm just using that as part of the background for the story. And as he started to experience his strength, he was actually a benevolent warrior, that what he was conquering lands for was to set people free from really horrific ruling monarchs, right? That was his mission, right? He was going to free humanity from the torment. One thing that he was told is there are two parts of the world that you never go into, because if you do, you will never come out of there. One was the Vietnamese Peninsula, and the other one was the Afghanistan Mountain Valley. Because the people in the Vietnamese Peninsula, which of course includes Laos and Cambodia in today's division of countries, etc. The Vietnamese culture and the Afghanistan culture are so self-reliant, are so self-integrated. He was warned that if you go there, you'll never come back out. And so when I was, in the 50s, when the French were still in their colonial power position in Vietnam, and they were starting to pull out because they had been devastated in the Second World War, and they just didn't have the will or the military strength to maintain, the French Indochina colony. And the Vietnamese were looking to, gain their independence. And so France was in communication with other nations about, what do we do about this? Because we've got this threat of other types of government, right? I'm not even going to mention names here as far as that goes. But what happened was, and my parents and were very much in conversation with us, is they said, look at what's happening in the world, and look at what's happening after, the Second World War, the Korean War, and now we're looking at Vietnam. And because we were yogic, mystic, meditative, violence was not a part of our programming. And so for the idea of going into the army and being told that I had to go someplace was completely out of the question. And so I was hiding in college, and this is what, 1963, 1964, 1965. I was hiding in college as an architecture major. Music was my main love. But I didn't think that music was going to be what I needed to go to college for, because I was already a musician. I'd been a musician since I could sit on the piano bench or stand on it. And so the idea of war in Vietnam to me was an absolute no. And so I spent several years, I spent 2 years actually in college, and then through a ruptured appendix and the complications from that, I actually died in the hospital and was revived after nearly 2 minutes. It was a minute and 45 seconds, according to the medical records, that I had no heartbeat and no breath. And I went to the other side of time and had an experience, and I wrote about it in a book called Buried Treasures. And that put me into a position of absolute commitment to not participating in the war. Before that, I thought, well, what if I get drafted? I thought I might be forced into it. But this is the point of the story. At the point of death, and how I was instructed by guides in that death process, I learned that you are in charge of you, that you're in charge of your breathing, you're in charge of your eating, you're in charge of your life. No one else is. And that you must take that power and use it appropriately. But you must use it primarily in its primary position to control what it is that you act upon, that you say, that you do, that you participate in. And so when I came back from that death experience, I knew that there was no way that I was going to be drafted. So I didn't even have to go to college to stay out of the draft. So that's when my musical career really started to take off. But it was, thank you very much, Vietnam. It was Vietnam that gave me the incredible assignment to really follow my own will, which is the center layer of the heart, so that I was really follow my own will. And it was that was the end of my concern about being drafted into Vietnam. I went and took my they sent me a draft notice. I went and took my physical, and I told them all to basically just forget it. I wasn't going. And the way I did it was I acted quite insane, and they gave me a psychological exemption. They said, this guy is, no way are we going to ever be able to control this guy. So he is not available for the U.S. Army. And I said, you got that right.
So you took control of your life, and then your
Control
path.
of life, yeah.
Your path. How? At what age did you arrive at Kundalini Yoga? Were you practicing something else? You had yoga already in your system, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we were working with, since birth, I was working with Kriya Yoga. And so that's one of the reasons why I was, one of those few people, my good friends, let me finish sentences here. I was one of the few people who went through the 60s that remembers the 60s, right? Because I didn't do drugs or alcohol. That was not part of my routine. My routine was literally sadhana. From a very early age, we would get up, we would do our yoga, we would do Kriya Yoga, we would do our own form of Tai Chi, we would do deep meditations, we would do mantra in the household with my parents and my sister. And so when I was introduced to Kundalini. I was introduced to Yogi Bhajan on January 10th of 1969. So I was one of the very first students of Kundalini at that point, right? At that point in time. I mean, obviously, throughout history, there's been students of Kundalini for, millennia, right? But in this particular Western movement of Kundalini, I was January 10th it was a Friday, I remember. Friday, January 10th, 1969. So I was 23 years old. Just a few months later, I would turn 24. And the reason that Kundalini spoke to me was because, one, it had mantra, and I was a musician. And two, it gave me sensations through the breath and through the asana, through the kriya. It gave me the same sensations that I had felt on the other side of time, and that I had been experiencing throughout my childhood, when we would do our daily routine, when my parents and sister and I would do our daily routine. It gave me those same sensations, and it was one of the first forms of spiritual practice that gave me that same impulse, that same impulse. So I knew from that moment on that this was an additional component to my accumulation of soul-based material. I use the expression soul-based instead of spiritual just because I think it defines it perhaps more effectively.
And you took your life away from drafting. You stayed in the Kriya Yoga. And where did this Kundalini bring you? Where are you now?
Well, I was geographically, I met Kundalini, I met Yogi Bhajan in Los Angeles. And I have stayed in Los Angeles as one of my main bases. And where it took me emotionally is it gave me more tools. So there's Kriya Yoga, there's Hatha Yoga that we did, there's our form of Tai Chi that we were doing, Qigong that we were doing, and then Kundalini. And so it added to all of these tools in order for me to maintain an inspired consciousness while still being rooted in the ground, which is really important, because you can have a hugely inspired consciousness with no roots, and you kind of drift off into, into the never never world. Or you can have deep roots and be concerned about expanding that awareness, and just be, consumed in slavery, right? The slavery of the capital system, right? The money making and the routine that goes from whenever you start until whenever you get exhausted and retire. So what I found was that if you can find something that maintains your inspiration without going into desperation, and maintaining that deep rootedness, that's the key. And I found that in the Kundalini Kriya. I found that in Hatha Yoga. I found that in Kriya Yoga. I find that in the mantras. I find that in all of those things. I find that in the rhythms. My music is usually quite rhythmical, because I really feel that hope, will, and courage of the 3 layers of the heart. And so that's what makes my life, and the life of my wife and our children, our grandchildren, that's what makes it very, very solid, as well as being very fulfilling and very inspiring.
Mhm. So your teachings nowadays, you've built the platform 13 Moons, right?
Yeah.
And it has the Kundalini University in it, right?
Yeah, it's kind of the other way around. It's kind of I built Kundalini University,
Mm.
and then we said, okay, well, what do we need for the ongoing studies? Once somebody has gone through the 200-hour, and now we are adding a 300-hour, that both of them start in September and October. What happens after people have graduated? How can we stay together? How can we remain as a community of teachers sharing our knowledge? I mean, when I watch the conversations that go on within the 13 Moons community, I'm just so inspired by how much teaching they're sharing, and how much intuitive insight they are spreading to each other. It's so rewarding to watch this unfold, because since I was old enough to understand what was going on around me, I would say, maybe 3, 4, 5 years old, I knew that this is what I needed to be doing. I needed to be gathering people together so that they could share, that we could share the wealth of our wisdom. Because being a young child, being raised by very intuitive parents, and having my relatives also be very intuitive and being followers until I was 7, Paramahansa Yogananda, Swamiji was still in his body, and being surrounded by these great masters and what have you. It gave me a sense of, this is what life is about. This other thing that's going on here, the Second World War, the Korean War, all that, and then ultimately Vietnam, and on and on and on. This is just an exasperated argument, and there's better ways of handling disagreements than arguments. There can be debate. I can remember sitting with the Dalai Lama, and and he said, he says, our sect of Buddhism, we debate. We like to debate the sutras, and it's something that we really, really enjoy doing. And then he said, but then there's some times when I don't want to debate. All I want is a cookie and a cup of tea. And to me, that just explained the world. You can debate and you can have a fair debate without anybody saying my way has to be the way. And you can get to a place where there's a semblance of an agreement, like that zone of the circles. I'm dropping the name right now. That area in which the coordinating circles are common, and that becomes the part of life. The Quaker system had that really enforced, that ability to sit and communicate when you were moved and inspired to, and then sit and absorb. We call it in Kundalini, we call it sunya, right? That deep listening. That it's not just listening, it's deep sensing, it's deep feeling, deep noticing, deep listening. And it's that sensation of let's find common ground, because common ground is where life prospers. Common ground is fertile. If we look throughout nature, the old growth forest, they do it very, very well. The desert plants, they do it very, very well. They have adapted to that commonality, what works. Not how can I gain more, but how can we share more so that we prosperous in life. We are prosperous in life, and then life rewards us so that we give into life, and then life rewards us. And that's the cycle. That's also the cycle of the Kundalini, right? Kundalini rising, parasympathetic nerves coming back down, calming the body through the glands and the organs. Kundalini rising again. It's a current, it's an orbit, it's a circuit that once you get accustomed to igniting it, exciting it, inspiring it on a daily basis, just becomes a part of life. So whether you do it with Kriya Yoga, Hatha Yoga, any form, or Kundalini, it's that same living orbit. And then there's the heart cross and the lower cross, right? And so you have this, what I call, you have this gyroscope, right? A gyroscope has all these twirling wheels in all different directions so that you feel that balance in the center point.
It's like the buildup of an atom.
Mm-hmm.
The neutral core and all the electrons around it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when I hear you right,
that's a good one. I'm gonna steal that one from you.
Oh, no, it's not mine.
Yeah, I know.
That's
That's great. I never even thought of an atom as a gyroscope, but it is. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Perfectly balanced gyroscope.
I was taught that the neutron is our sushumna, the proton is our, I think it's Idala, and the Pingala is Ida. No, the Ida is the electrons, and the Pingala would be the proton, something like that. Do
you know the proton is eternal? The proton, I was talking with a quantum physicist, the proton never dies. It's phenomenal. The nature of the atomic structure, right?
Infinity in it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very much so.
So all these different tools that you have learned from in life, yes, and now you've come to a point where you have a community on 30 Moons which shares this collective experience and shares the wisdom. If I just poke and provoke you, I mean, why do we need that when the age of AI is coming? Like, well, ChatGPT, I can ask anything, and within 5 years, there's so much more knowledge shared. Why is it so important still to have a human community and a human experience versus this to talking to the younger listeners of now? Like, hey, I've got ChatGPT. Why would I need more experience? What's your take on that?
There's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. ChatGPT can give you knowledge, but without experience, you're not able to turn knowledge into wisdom. Wisdom is the way in which you have discovered through your experience, like water flowing. How do you overcome the obstacles? ChatGPT can tell you, okay, these are the steps you take to overcome the obstacle. But sitting inside of you will still be that doubt, will still be that fear. Unless you've had the experience that gives you the ability to know that, yes, I achieved my desired result by going in this way. That's how water works. Water is a solution. And that's why they call, when you've corrected a problem, you've solved it, you've arrived at a solution. And so it's wonderful. ChatGPT to me is like the library of Alexandria, right? But unless you take the information, the data, and you act upon it with some kind of experiential feedback loop, right? Where action and the reaction and action and the reaction, all you are is just a database. So ChatGPT, AI, let's not brand it, AI in general, is going to be a great advantage to us because we can reproduce. The Library of Alexandria was destroyed, and book burnings all over the world where authoritarian governments want to limit the awareness. Well, you've got access. You've got a supercomputer in your pocket or on your wrist, and you just ask AI, okay, what is it that I need here? And it gives you like 1,400 examples of what you need here, right? So then you have to have the wisdom to know, okay, which one of those do I actually choose, right? Because it's giving you a multitude of options. And so, by the way, this is how Atlantis was destroyed, because they invented technologies that surpass even what we have. But the technology accelerated beyond the human awareness. And when technology accelerates beyond human awareness, that's when, of all those options, you make incorrect choices. And with the kind of power that all of those choices have, we can destroy the life on Earth. We can't destroy the world. I mean, it will reprocess, wipe life off the surface of the planet. Some life still exists underneath the surface. That which is able to survive the Holocaust or the cataclysm, it will survive, and then it will re-evolve back up through the process. That's happened so many times on Earth. Archaeology doesn't recognize that. They think it only happened once. The Earth is far older than 13.8 billion years, but that's for another story, Sandesh. We could go into that one. That is a wonderful rabbit hole. I've met the rabbits inside that hole, and it is a wonderful group of rabbits. Let me just say, So the end result is that AI is the data. We need the wisdom to apply the data. Otherwise, the data will be random and not necessarily beneficial.
And how do we connect to that wisdom so that we can grasp all this additional wealth of information that we can have in
Daily practice. keep, it's like water and rock. The incredible smoothness of river rocks, yeah? The incredible smoothness of the river rock is caused because the water has been washing over it for thousands and thousands of years. And so water dissolves rock over time because water is a solution and rock is that solid, stable position. So we need both the solid, stable position, which we find in our daily practice, and we also need the flexibility, which is, liquidity, the water, which we find in our daily practice. So a combination of solidity and liquidity are what we give ourselves physically in our daily practice. And then we start to play with the emotional body with sound, mantra, right? Vocalizing. We start to play the entire instrument with the bow of the breath, And that's just that incredible combination of the physiology creating the emotional content, and then the breath, the pranic movement coming over and through that. And then out of that, we establish a frequency. And the frequency is either of wisdom or foolishness. And you can develop that frequency of wisdom, which is really, I look at wisdom as being a 100,000-foot view, which means you engage the parasympathetic nervous system. And you jump up to that 100,000-foot view so that you can engage the circumstance in the most opportunistic way, that you can allow the tendencies with some guidance rather than just being a random attitude.
So this wisdom, if we are able to maintain a discipline and gain this 100 miles high perspective, we find our path through the chaos of information nowadays. Is that the promise it gives sadhana? I mean, I have a practice, of course, but what
No,
do
I
you?
understand your question.
My question is that the solution to find our true way through all the information that is coming towards us, is trying to make us do whatever they want us to do? Is that going to give us the way to find what is our mission in this life?
What is the way? Let's put it this way. We're inside of a vehicle, right? As a human life. And what a daily practice, what sadhana gives us, however we formulate that daily practice, what that gives us is we clean the instrument, we clean the vehicle, we clean the windshield so we can see clearly. We clean the mechanisms so we can hear clearly. We clean the structure so that we can feel clearly, so that we become clairvoyant, clairaudient, and clairsentient. And when we have that clarity, we have that wisdom, we have that 100 miles high view of being able to see, I see where it's coming from, I see where it wants to go to, and I can see where if I put a little bit of an angle here, I can make it actually go to where I believe it should go to, speaking just, symbolically there. And so what enables wisdom is clarity, is voyance, that clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience. that intuitive capacity. And so by having a daily practice, we align ourselves so that we don't have any disturbing frictions in our system. The whole thing starts to become coherent. The gut brain, the heart brain, the head brain start to work together so that it's connection and nourishment, circulation of giving and receiving, and then the analytics of the head brain. And so this all starts working together, all up through the vayus and the chakras, coming back down, parasympathetic nerves of the vagus nerve, feeding all of the glands and organs, which are secreting hormones, lipids, peptides, and proteins into the bloodstream so that the whole system is operating smoothly. And when the whole system is operating smoothly physically, the whole system begins to be abundant and prosperous emotionally. You have good feelings about what it is that you're doing because you can see outcomes mentally. You're able to see down the road. If I do this, then we achieve that. And so physically, emotionally, mentally, and soulfully, you come to these conclusions. That's the accumulation of wisdom. That is what a strong and consistent daily practice will provide for each one of us.
And that's what we learn in the Kundalini training, correct?
Very much so. You can learn it in so many different ways. The way that I provide it, the learning for it is definitely through our 200-hour training and our 300-hour training. And people say, I came into this wanting to achieve this. And what I ended up achieving was so much more, because, and as you know, and as anyone listening and viewing that has participated in a training, that it doesn't just give you what's in the book. It gives you so much more because it's an experiential event that you work with over months.
And your training is a fully online training, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Right.
but I go live with it twice a week. So I'm live twice a week with the 200-hour and twice a week with the 300-hour. And those are extended times in which, and then we have a Q&A. So it's very interactive. It's very live and interactive, as well as being very much self-study, very much group study, group consciousness. So we have these large cohorts, and then we divide them down into smaller groups so that each person's voice can be an important voice. That
And it's
every
global, right? It's globally. Your training is globally, isn't it?
The only way, some people are asking me all the time, when are you going to go back to in person? And I say, I'm not, because the reality of being online is that I can reach around the world without anybody having to go through all of what you have to go through to travel to get to a location. Because that's really, really important, that we are able to reach the global audience. I mean, we have people from every part of the world in every one of our trainings.
And how, how does that, because some people might say, but I really like physical uh, presence with a group, feel the group energy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something they miss, or they actually get it through the practices and the interactions in the group?
Well, I'll approach that question in two ways. Because I've been in front of very large groups, 10, 20, 30,000 people when I was a musician, and maybe 2 or 3,000 as a Kundalini teacher when I've taught in large gatherings. And then, more intimate, at yoga centers where there's maybe 150 or 200 people in the room. And it's a very visceral sensation. I understand that. But online is the way of the future, and we're right now on the threshold of that transition where we're becoming a global community, all of humanity. And so, for example, in the 19th century, the 1800s, the only way that you could experience music was to be at a concert. And so people would go to concerts to experience music. There was no other way. There was no recordings of music. So people would either play music or listen to music live. And over the decades, the invention of the phonograph and the invention of the radio and the invention of the television and the invention and on and on and on. And now you just take the phone out of your pocket and you can listen to anything, any kind of music from any part of the world, anywhere. Now, if you were to put those earbuds in your ear and say to a person that is brought out of the 19th century, let's say 1850, and you said to them, here, put these in your ears and listen to whatever music you want to hear. And they would say, but this isn't music. This isn't being at a concert. And you're going, yeah, but you can hear any kind of music you want to hear. I don't need to hear any kind of music. I want to hear. So that argument has been going on for centuries. And we're in the midst of it once again. So what you have to be able to accommodate, and that's what I've learned to do, speaking in front of cameras almost every day now for years and years and years, is that you have to be able to allow your body to stop differentiating between an online experience and an in-person experience. And all of a sudden, your body is going to begin to translate. After you do it for a while, your body is going to begin to feel like I feel you and you feel me right here, right now. And if we can encourage, which means to stimulate the heart, cœur means heart in French. As you well know, from Vietnam, French was part of your occupying force, right?
We grew up loving the French.
Yeah. So the idea that you can develop this other sense is important. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not important to go to a symphony in person, right? That's a great thing too. And it's a great thing too to go to an in-person yoga class, if you will. But let's face it, the future is knocking on our door right now, and the future is online. The future is global. Just like your podcast, you can reach people everywhere on earth because you're broadcasting it indiscriminately. And that is the beauty of online. And that's why when people ask me, I say, no, I'm a pioneer of the new wave. And the new wave is online, not in person. And I'll tell you, being as, let me just show one thing to the audience, so to speak. I teach with a lot of art. So here, let's bring it over here so your screen can see it.
Yeah, 5 stages of human.
I teach with a lot of art. And for me to travel with all my art, all my instruments, all my, microphone, it's too much. I have developed probably the most advanced studios in all of our locations. I've developed these advanced studios so that we can overcome any limitation and present like an in-person event. And so then it becomes incumbent upon the students to begin to develop that other sense.
Wonderful. Yeah. I completely feel you there, because I watched one of your lessons, free lessons online, and the sound is so crisp. It's so clear. You can really sense it there. Hey, 80 now. Let's say at 100, what is your legacy? What do you still want or feel from that 100-mile point of view that you still want to do?
There's an ancient part of the Vedic writings in the Puranas, and there's one called the Bhavishya Purana, and it talks about the ratio in the 5 stages of human development, that there are this many in stage 1 and stage 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And it gets smaller as it goes through. Because if you think about the population of the world, or the population of the world being a one-room schoolhouse, in that schoolhouse you've got, 30, 40 students and 1 or 2 teachers. So the ratio of teacher to student is large. And it's the same thing on Earth. Not all humans that are young are actually young in the sense of the soul. Very old in the sense of the soul, even though they're very young chronologically. And a lot of the elders, very young souls. So you can't judge who is ready or who is not based on chronological age. And so therefore, in the Bhavishya Purana, it talks about the ratio, 2/3 of the global population at any time, regardless of the century, so to speak, 2/3 are in the embryo stage. 1/5 is in the fetus stage. 1/10 is in the natal, the birthing stage, birthing into higher awareness. 1/30 or 3%, 1/30 is in the dhyanal stage. 1/300 is in the Bhavishya stage. Bhavishya literally means history of the future. It's where time is no longer sequential. The past, present, and future are all existing simultaneously. It's the realm of intuition. And so 1 in 300 are in that realm. So you have 1 in 300 people on Earth, which represents 0.3% of the world's population. If you multiply 0.3% of the world's population times a round figure of about 8 billion people on the Earth today, that's 24 million people. 24 million people are just like you and just like me, totally ready for exalted consciousness, may not have gone through the experience, the wisdom creation in life yet, but they're available. And when they hear the calling, it will register deeply. And so when you ask what is my goal is to by the way, my Chinese astrology is the wood rooster, right? The wood rooster is the rooster that wakes you up in the morning, right? So my job on earth is to wake people up to their own mission, to their highest mission. 24 million are right there ready. The next one is 1 in 30. That represents 240 million. So right there you have 264 million people who are ready to be exactly like us. They're ready to calm the torrential fires of the earth. They're ready to act more ecological. They're ready to act more economically compassionate, where there's not starvation, there's not poverty. This 264 million out of round figures about 8 billion people is sufficient to tilt the scale because of leverage. Because the leverage that we hold is the leverage of our wisdom, not the leverage of our knowledge, but the leverage of our experiential wisdom. And so it's up to us. And that's why I'm so thrilled that you have this podcast and that there are other podcasts around the world, because our task is to wake the people up. Wake the people up. And I call it the reachable and teachable. The ones who are ready will listen, and they will answer the calling, and they will become inspired. And the ones that are not ready, if we get enough of the ones who are ready, if you get enough adults in a room full of children, you can play games and you can play music and you can do things that calm the children down. Rather than incarcerating, you have to inspire. And so I look at us, there's a thing in carnivals called balloon animals, where they blow up these long balloons and then they tie them into these animals. That's what I call us as Kundalini teachers, as spiritual teachers, as soul-based teachers. That's what I call us. We are just the balloon animal makers, so that we can teach others to make balloon animals that are going to learn, and then we can enchant the children with the balloon animals, because there's 80-year-old children, there's 100-year-old children, there's 60-year-old children, 40, 25. There's children that are not of that advanced consciousness, and they need to feel safe. And unlike the way that the idiots thousands of years ago created a hierarchy out of this, they called it the caste system. That was the horrific misuse of this knowledge. And once again, the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom uses this awareness that it's a one-room schoolhouse and there's all these different levels of soul age. And wisdom says, okay, let's wake up the reachable and teachable, and let's nourish those who are needing to grow into that stage, rather than let's wake up the reachable and teachable and then just take control over everything, right? The way in which it was done, all those vast millennia ago. And it fails. That way of working fails every time. The way of working that will ultimately succeed is the benevolent path of compassionate consciousness. And it's not about branding, by the way. As we know, branding, and this is where I separated from the Kundalini that I was, involved with for decades, is it became brand protection. We've got to protect the brand, and this is the way the brand, this is the way it's done. No. Hold on. Everybody has to learn in their own way. The way true education is that you meet the student so that the student can understand. You don't dictate to the student. And you don't set up a bunch of rules and regulations. That's just old thinking, and it doesn't work going forward, as we well know, Sandesh. We know that for a fact. That's why we're talking.
Yeah, we are also Yoga Alliance certified to one of the 300 programs we have. So we completely understand you very much. I guess that's why we've been aligned, and Guru Ratan is on our path, and it's there is a consciousness, a shared consciousness there. Yes,
yeah.
Great. Let me ask you, because it's. I mean, I could listen to you for hours, and I'm sure we will somehow. But what do you do to help the teachers become successful, to radiate? Because you won't do it alone. And I heard of incredible nice numbers in your your trainings. But how do you help them to, so that they step out into their own light?
Well, part of the training is self-empowerment, because it has to start in at your core. You can learn, again, I'm so glad that you asked the question earlier about AI and why do we need wisdom if we've got AI, etc. So that's again applied here. You can feed the teacher, the prospective teacher. You can feed them with all of the details and the data. But in order to light the fuse inside of them, that they feel like, I am who I am, and I can do this, right? And I can start to bring in this information as I'm teaching, and I don't have to be, looking, making sure that I'm saying everything properly, and I can start to feel at ease. That's one of the things that we also teach, is that self-empowerment. So that you're not saying, well, what did he say? What did she say? But you're starting to go, what am I downloading, if you will? Right? What am I receiving? How does my fluidity of solution approach this exact, very unique situation that's being presented to me? Let me feel it. And I look at it the way I looked, the metaphor that I use often is the idea of the old the old keysmith, right? So now the way keys are made, you grind them, and you use a grinding wheel to make a key exactly the way another key is. But then, and I'm sure that you have it in the Netherlands and it's throughout Europe, that you have these old structures that have the old keys, right? The old keys that were cast. They were cast out of liquid metal. They weren't grind keys, they were the cast keys. So back in those days, the locksmith, the person who was creating the keysmith, would have a container of putty, of soft clay. And in order to cast another key to be exactly like this key, they would take the key and they would press it into the soft clay. And then they would pour the liquid metal into that. First of all, they would take that soft clay and they would make a negative, and then they would make a positive out of plaster, because the clay would just disappear if they poured the molten metal into it. So they end up making an exact replica of that impression in the process of first taking that, then turning it into a negative with plaster, then turning it into a positive with plaster, and then pouring the liquid metal into that, and then you end up with a key. The importance was that first impression. The importance was how clear and how pure is that clay, is that putty? And is it firm enough to take the impression? Is it soft enough to take the impression, but not so soft that it might lose the impression once the key is removed? And so it's a combination, and this is some of the things that we teach. When you're in a situation and you're teaching in a situation, you're teaching in a classroom that has 40 or 50 people, or you're teaching online that and has a number of people, how do you sense the shape of the class? How do you sense the impression of the class? And then how do you form from that the key that can unlock the class? And so that sensitivity is one of the things that we really work on throughout the 6 months of 200 or the 8.5 months of 300. We work on that sensitivity, which has to be soft enough to take the impression, but firm enough to hold the impression while you study the impression of what is happening in this moment. And so that gives confidence. By the way, the word confidence, as you know, in French is with faith. It means with faith. And so how do you teach that faith to the student, so the student becoming a teacher carries that into their classroom, whether it's an in-person or an online classroom, and is able to then really feel the sensation? Because you're absolutely correct. I won't do it alone. It's got to be a tag, you're it, right? It's got to be, getting as many can be involved in this as possible, because it's it's probably a 25-year plan. And I'll be around for that length of time. I'll be 105 at the end of that plan. So, maybe I'll have a few years left after that to sit and enjoy.
And watch and look.
Yeah, let me just enjoy
So much
this
energy. It's incredible. It's incredible. I feel your energy. Yes, I do feel it. I guess working behind the screen or teaching behind the screen does give you that ability. And you have so much energy. It's incredible. If you look at now and before, is your energy less or even bigger than before through daily practice? Stable.
Same.
Incredible.
Yeah. I look at energy is infinite everywhere, always. Aging is an attitude. That attitude is registered visually, auditorially, viscerally, emotionally, mentally. And so I work very, very, very hard. I feel like, the story of the Buddha. He goes outside the palace and he sees an old person, never seen an old person. He sees an unhealthy person. I've never seen an unhealthy person. Sees a dying and a dead person. Never seen that before. Had been so protected. I feel that the aging process is identical to that. That when I hear that, so-and-so is this old and they're acting a particular way, they're acting like an old person. I have to reprogram myself in that instance. I have to literally cleanse myself of that suggestion. And I have to just say, there but for fortune go I. Thank God, thank Guru, that, I am who I am. Because those are very influential to see people that are a certain age acting a certain way, looking at you and saying, you're not acting your age. Well, I never acted my age, so, I think people telling you to act your age is a false statement. So what is 80? What is 60? What is 40? What is 20? It's all the same, because there's no part of my body except for maybe a few cells deep in the heart that are any older than 18 years, 7 years, 11 years, 3 years. My skin isn't any older than 60 days. The outer layers, my blood isn't any older than 112, 120 days, 4 lunar cycles. It's only the deep bone and deep marrow and deep nerve that is somewhere between 7 and 18 years old. And then there are just a few cells that travel with you throughout your life. But everything else is replacing and reproducing. And so how do you keep nourishing all of these cells with a fresh attitude? That's important. So my daily practice is physical, emotional, mental, attitudinal. I'm very much have to, and part of my daily practice is musical, artistic. You have to keep everything fresh in order for the body to believe that it's young, in order for the emotions to believe that they're young. And the beauty is that maintaining the youth of the physical and the emotional, while enabling knowledge, AI, right? Knowledge, data, to become wisdom, is part of the daily practice. And the daily practice isn't just a routine that you do for X number of minutes in the morning. The daily practice is, what do you practice all day long?
Yeah. Why, Guru? Thank you for sharing this. I'm sure everybody felt the energy of Guru Singh. Is there anything final statement you would like to say to this little group of people, the 1/300 and the 1/30th, I think, that are listening to us, to you right now? Is there anything you want to tell them?
Yeah. Find your community, whether it's an in-person community or it's an online community. It's like our ancestors a million years ago, cold in the forest, looking for the fire, looking for some other beings who had captured some fire and were feeding that fire. So look for the fire, and look for the water, and look for the earth, and look for the air that you can engage along with the ether in community, so that you can gather around that common fire, that beautiful running stream of wisdom. Breathe the air of life, vital life force. Sink your roots deep into the earth and be fed by the ethers of universal wisdom that you can then shape to apply to this very moment in the 21st century. And then let's gather together online. Let's share our stories. Let's share our techniques and our technologies. Let's share our discoveries and our adaptations and our inventions. That's how things grow. Tradition holds the base. But if it's only tradition and you've got to stay by tradition, and that's only to be done by tradition, then you only end up with the base. We need to honor the tradition as the base and then build on it with the innovation and the invention of the present moment, because the circumstances that are existing within this present moment didn't exist 500 years ago, didn't exist 5,000 years ago. And so adaptation of the traditions is what's going to enable the traditions to continue to live. And I would advise you to maintain your freedom from heavy brand orientation. Find that which fits and suits you anywhere on earth. There are so many wisdom teachings. Find that which fits and suits. And if it's what Sandesh works with, if it's what someone else works with, if it's what I work with, excellent. If you find something new, share it with us, please. We want to know about it. And that's it.
No, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Let's do this again. It was super fun.